The alien girl heard human music and instantly lost control. Thea Winters never expected her music therapy practice would become the center of an interstellar incident. The small studio in downtown Seattle, with its warm wooden floors and wall of windows overlooking the Space Needle, had always been her sanctuary. But today, it would become something far more significant. The Lysarian delegation arrived precisely at sunset, their silver transport vehicle settling silently in the parking lot. Thea watched through the windows as Naira Valen emerged, her iridescent scales catching the last rays of sunlight. The alien diplomat moved with an otherworldly grace, her tall, slender form draped in flowing robes that seemed to shift colors with every movement. "Ms. Winters," Naira greeted her, voice melodic even in Earth's standard English. "Thank you for agreeing to this unconventional consultation." Behind her, two Lysarian security officers took positions by the door, their crystalline armor glinting. Thea smiled, trying to hide her nervousness. "Please, call me Thea. And honestly, when the United Earth Diplomatic Corps calls asking for a favor, it's hard to say no." She gestured toward her therapy room, where various instruments lined the walls. "Though I'm still not clear on why a Lysarian diplomat needs a music therapist." Naira's silver eyes flickered with something like embarrassment. "We've discovered an unusual reaction to human music among my people. The Corps suggested you might help us understand why." As they entered the therapy room, Thea noticed how Naira's gaze lingered on each instrument. The piano in the corner, the array of drums, the collection of string instruments. What kind of reaction are we talking about? "It began at a diplomatic reception," Naira explained, settling onto a cushioned chair. "A human orchestra was performing. We found ourselves experiencing intense emotional responses, far beyond our normal range. Some of my colleagues became disinhibited." Thea raised an eyebrow. "Disinhibited how?" "Let's just say several centuries of Lysarian diplomatic protocol were forgotten in a matter of minutes." A faint purple flush colored Naira's scales. "We need to understand if this is an isolated incident or a broader phenomenon." Thea nodded, moving toward her piano. "Well, we should probably start with something simple, maybe a basic melody to establish a baseline." Her fingers hovered over the keys. "Just let me know if you feel anything unusual." The moment Thea began playing a gentle nocturne, the change in Naira was immediate and dramatic. The diplomat's scales rippled with waves of color, shifting from their natural pearl tone to deep blues and purples. Her pupils dilated, and her normally perfect posture melted into something more relaxed. "This is..." Naira's voice had dropped an octave. "Extraordinary. The harmonics, they're affecting my neural pathways somehow. It's like seeing colors I never knew existed." Thea continued playing, fascinated by the reaction. "Can you describe what you're feeling?" "Everything is more vibrant, more connected." Naira's eyes had drifted closed. "Our species communicates partially through biochemical signatures. This music, it's speaking to those same receptors, but in ways we've never experienced." Thea transitioned into a more complex piece, watching as Naira's scales blazed with new patterns. The security officers by the door were swaying slightly, their own scales beginning to shift colors. "I think," Thea said carefully, "we might be onto something bigger than just music therapy." Naira opened her eyes, meeting Thea's gaze with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Much bigger. Your music, it could revolutionize how our species interact. But it could also be dangerous in the wrong hands." The last notes faded away, leaving a charged silence. Outside, the Seattle skyline had darkened to purple twilight, the Space Needle illuminated against the clouds. But inside Thea's studio, something unprecedented was taking shape, a bridge between species built on nothing more than arranged sounds and good intentions. "We'll need to keep working together," Naira said finally, her scales still shimming with residual colors, "to understand this properly, if you're willing." Thea looked at her piano, then at the alien diplomat who had quite literally been moved by her music. "I think," she smiled, "this might be the most important therapy session I've ever conducted." As Naira left that evening, Thea couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed irrevocably. She'd always believed in music's power to heal and connect people. Now she was discovering it might connect entire species. She began making notes for their next session, her mind already filling with possibilities. What other effects might different styles of music have? Could this lead to better understanding between humans and Lysarians? And why couldn't she stop thinking about the way Naira's scales had shimmered in response to her playing? Outside, the first stars were appearing above Seattle's towers. Somewhere up there, Thea knew, the Lysarian diplomatic ship was orbiting, its crew probably still processing what they'd discovered today. She placed her hands on the piano keys again and began to play, wondering what other wonders might emerge from this unexpected harmony between worlds. 2 weeks after their first session, Thea's studio had been transformed into an impromptu research facility. Holographic monitors lined the walls, tracking neural responses and biochemical changes as she played for an ever-growing number of Lysarian volunteers. But today's session was different, just her and Naira, working late into the evening. "Try the minor scale again," Naira requested, her scales flickering with anticipation. She sat closer to the piano than protocol strictly advised, but they'd long since abandoned such formalities. There's something about those frequencies that resonates differently. Thea's fingers danced across the keys, watching as patterns of light rippled across Naira's iridescent skin. The diplomat's response to music had grown more controlled over their sessions, but no less intense. "Your neural patterns are showing new configurations," Thea noted, glancing at the monitors. "It's like your brain is learning to speak a new language." "In a way, it is." Naira leaned forward, her silver eyes reflecting the soft glow of the equipment. "Our scientists are fascinated. Music seems to be activating ancient neural pathways we didn't know we had. Some theorize we once had our own form of musical communication, lost to evolution." The melody shifted, and Thea watched as Naira's scales bloomed with deep purples and blues, colors she'd learned indicated emotional resonance. "It's not just about the sound, is it?" she asked softly. "There's something more happening here." Naira's gaze met hers, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. There usually is when two species discover they're more alike than different. A knock at the door interrupted whatever might have come next. Dr. James Russell from the Earth Diplomatic Corps entered, followed by a tall Lysarian wearing the insignia of their science ministry. Both looked serious. "Ms. Winters, Ambassador Vallon," Russell nodded. "We have a situation developing. Word of your research has spread. The Intergalactic Council is demanding a full presentation on human music's effects on alien neurology." More concerning, the Lysarian scientist added, "Other species are reporting similar responses to human music. The Centaurians experienced mass euphoria during a classical concert in their capital. A Proximan trade delegation went into a meditative trance during a street musician's performance." Thea's fingers stilled on the piano keys. "That's unexpected." "It's unprecedented," Russell corrected, "and potentially dangerous. If human music can affect alien biology this profoundly, some are arguing it should be classified as a controlled substance. Others want to study it as a potential diplomatic tool." "And what do you want?" Naira asked, her scales shifting to alert patterns. "We want you two to continue your research, but under official oversight. The implications are too significant to ignore." Russell handed Thea a tablet. "We're setting up a dedicated facility. Top-of-the-line equipment, full diplomatic protection." Thea scrolled through the proposal, her heart sinking. "This would mean leaving my practice, my patients, to potentially help billions," the Lysarian scientist countered. "Ambassador Vallon's insights combined with your musical expertise could revolutionize interspecies relations." Naira moved closer to Thea, her presence somehow both alien and comfortingly familiar. "The choice must be yours," she said quietly. "But would appreciate continuing our work together. Looking up, Thea caught a flash of something in Naira's expression. Hope, perhaps, or something deeper that transcended species barriers. The piano beside them seemed to hum with potential, like it knew it had become more than just an instrument. "When do we start?" Thea asked. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Thea arranged coverage for her patients, packed up her equipment, and tried not to think too hard about how quickly her life had changed. The new facility, a sleek building overlooking Puget Sound, was everything Russell had promised and more. But it was the moments between official sessions that meant the most late nights when she and Naira would experiment with different musical styles, watching as each new melody painted colors across Lycerian scales and opened doors between their worlds. "Tell me about your world's music," Thea asked one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sound in colors that matched Naira's scales. "We have something similar, but it's more mathematical, precise." Naira's fingers traced patterns in the air. "Your music has something else, something that speaks to emotions we didn't know we could feel. And is that a good thing?" Thea's voice was soft. "Finding emotions you didn't know existed." Naira turned to her, scales shimmering with colors Thea had never seen before. "I'm beginning to think it might be the best thing that's ever happened to us." Outside, the stars were emerging, each one possibly hosting other species about to discover the power of human music. But in that moment, Thea could only focus on how the last light of day played across Naira's scales, creating harmonies more beautiful than any she could play. They had started this journey seeking understanding between species. They were finding something far more profound, a resonance that transcended biology, a harmony that defied explanation. And somewhere in the space between notes and neural responses, two hearts from different worlds were learning to beat in sync. The discovery happened during a routine analysis of Naira's neural scans. Thea was reviewing the data from their latest session when she noticed something extraordinary. The patterns in Naira's brain weren't just responding to the music anymore. They were replicating it. "Look at this," she called to Dr. Russell, who was monitoring from the observation room. "Her neural pathways are actually storing the musical frequencies, like she's learning to play them internally." The implications hit her just as Naira entered the lab, her scales shimmering with what Thea now recognized as anticipation. "You're becoming a living instrument," Thea breathed. "Is that what this feeling is?" Naira touched her temple gently. "I've been hearing the melodies even when you're not playing. At first I thought it was just memory, but it's more than that. I can feel them resonating through my entire biological structure." Dr. Russell leaned forward, his expression intense. "Can you reproduce the frequencies?" Naira closed her eyes in concentration. Gradually, a soft humming filled the room, not from her vocal cords, but from her entire being. Her scales rippled in waves, each creating a different note until she was literally playing one of Thea's compositions through her own body. "Extraordinary," Russell whispered. But Thea noticed something else. The other Lycerian researchers in the lab had stopped working. Their scales were beginning to pulse in harmony with Naira's frequencies. "Stop," Thea said sharply. "Something's wrong." Naira's eyes snapped open, and the music ceased. The other Lycerians shook themselves, looking dazed. "What just happened?" one of them asked. "It appears," Russell said slowly, "that Ambassador Valen has developed the ability to affect her own people's neural patterns, using internalized human music as a carrier wave." The implications were staggering. A single Lycerian, trained in human music, could potentially influence the emotional and neural states of others of their species. The diplomatic ramifications alone were enormous. "This changes everything," Russell continued. "We need to inform both governments immediately. This could be either a breakthrough in interspecies relations or a potential weapon." Naira finished quietly. Her scales had dulled to a matte gray, the color of deep concern. The next few days were a whirlwind of classified meetings and emergency consultations. Thea found herself explaining basic music theory to military officials, while Naira underwent extensive neural mapping. The facility's security was doubled, then tripled. Late one night, as they sat in what had become their favorite spot overlooking the sound, Thea finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Are you afraid?" Naira's scales flickered with complex patterns before settling into the deep blue of honesty. "Not of what's happening to me. I'm afraid of what others might do with this knowledge. My people's history isn't entirely peaceful, Thea. The ability to influence neural patterns, some would see it as too tempting a power to ignore. We could stop," Thea offered, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "End the research before it goes too far." "Could you?" Naira turned to her, silver eyes intense. "Stop playing. Stop feeling the music in your soul, because I don't think I can anymore. It's become part of me, as essential as breathing." Thea's hand found Naira's, their fingers intertwining despite their alien differences. "Then we make sure it's used for connection, not control. That was always the point of music therapy: healing, understanding, bringing people together." A soft chime interrupted them. An urgent message from Russell. More cases were being reported worldwide. Lysarians exposed to human music were developing similar abilities. A concert in Tokyo had resulted in a spontaneous mass harmonization event. The Chinese government was reporting unauthorized musical gatherings near their Lysarian embassy. "They're calling it the harmony phenomenon," Russell's holographic form explained. "It's spreading faster than we can track. And it's not just passive reception anymore. Lysarians are actively seeking out human music, creating their own interpretations, combining it with their biological resonance capabilities. Cultural evolution in real time." Naira mused, her scales rippling with academic interest despite the tension. "Or cultural contamination, depending on who you ask." Russell looked grave. "The Lysarian Conservative Coalition is demanding an immediate ban on all human music in Lysarian space. They're calling it a threat to their biological and cultural sovereignty." Thea felt her heart sink. They can't just ban music. They can try. Naira's scales had shifted to a pattern Thea had never seen before, determination mixed with something deeper, more personal. "But they don't understand. This isn't about control or contamination. It's about evolution, about two species finding a way to truly understand each other for the first time." She stood, her form silhouetted against the starlit sky. "We need to show them. Not tell them. Show them what this really means." "How?" Thea asked, though something in her heart already knew the answer. "We give them a performance they can't ignore. One that proves this isn't about power or politics. It's about harmony in its truest sense." Naira's scales were beginning to shimmer with possibility. "But I'll need your help. Your music, your understanding, your—" She paused, scales flushing slightly. "Your heart." Looking up at her, Thea realized they had long since passed the point where this was just research or diplomacy. Whatever was growing between them, this harmony of human and alien, of music and biology, of heart and soul, it was something entirely new in the universe. "Always," she said simply, and reached for Naira's hand again, as the stars wheeled overhead, witness to a duet that was only beginning. The United Earth Concert Hall had never hosted an event quite like this. Representatives from 17 alien species filled the ancient building's ornate chambers, their varied forms creating a living tableau of galactic diversity. In the front row, the Lysarian Conservative Coalition sat rigid and watchful, their scales locked in disapproving gray patterns. Backstage, Thea's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the piano's neural interface sensors. The instrument had been modified specifically for tonight's performance, capable of projecting both sound and the corresponding neural patterns that had proven so influential to alien physiology. "The coalition representatives are threatening to walk out before we even begin," Dr. Russell reported, hurrying backstage. "They're calling this a direct challenge to their cultural preservation laws." "Let them," Naira said, emerging from the shadows. She wore traditional Lysarian diplomatic robes, but they were interwoven with patterns that mimicked Earth's musical notation. They need to understand what they're really trying to ban. The house lights dimmed, sending a hush through the assembled dignitaries. Thea took her place at the piano, while Naira moved to center stage. They had rehearsed this hundreds of times, but never with so much at stake. Distinguished representatives, Naira began, her voice carrying naturally through the hall. You've heard many arguments about human music's effect on alien biology, about control and contamination, about cultural purity and sovereignty. Tonight, we show you what it truly means when two species learn to harmonize. Thea began to play, soft and simple at first. The neural interface projectors activated, making the music visible as waves of color in the air. Naira's scales began to shimmer in response, but this time she didn't fight the response. She enhanced it, using her newly developed abilities to amplify and reshape the harmonies. The effect rippled through the audience. Other Lysarians, despite their political stances, found their scales responding automatically. But it didn't stop there. The crystalline Arcturians began to chime in sympathetic resonance. The gaseous veil beings swirled in patterns matching the music's rhythm. Even the usually stoic mechanoids were registering unusual energy patterns. This is what they fear, Naira projected, her voice weaving through the music. Not that human music will control us, but that it will change us. And they're right. It has changed me. It has shown me that growth doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding new ways to be who you are. She gestured, and the neural patterns shifted, incorporating traditional Lysarian harmonics. The blend of human music and alien resonance created something entirely new, a symphony of biology and culture, of art and science. In the front row, one of the coalition leaders stood abruptly. For a moment, Thea feared they would call for an end to the performance. Instead, the elderly Lysarian scales began to pulse with complex patterns, adding another layer to the harmony. The music built, each species in the audience contributing their own resonance, their own interpretation of the melodies. The hall itself seemed to vibrate with the combined harmonies of a dozen worlds. But suddenly, something went wrong. The neural interface flickered, projecting chaotic patterns. Naira gasped, her scales flashing warning colors. The combined resonances were building too quickly, creating feedback loops through the alien nervous systems. Thea, she called out, her voice strained. The patterns, they're amplifying exponentially. Thea's fingers flew across the keys, trying to modulate the frequencies, to bring the cascading harmonies under control. But the effect had grown beyond her ability to manage it. Around the hall, various species were showing signs of distress as their neural systems struggled to process the overwhelming input. In that moment of crisis, Thea did the only thing she could think of. She stopped playing completely. The sudden silence was shocking, but the neural patterns continued to swirl through the air, sustained by the combined resonance of the assembled species. Then, in the silence, Naira began to hum. Not the complex harmonies they had practiced, but a simple lullaby Thea had played during their first session together. One by one, other Lysarians joined in, their scales creating shifting patterns of light. The Arcturians chimed softly, the veil beings swirled gently, each species finding their own way to complement the simple melody. The chaotic patterns began to stabilize, forming a new kind of harmony, one that didn't need technology or neural interfaces, just the natural resonance between different forms of life finding common ground in music. When the last echoes faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the coalition leader who had stood earlier spoke, his scales showing complex emotions. "We were wrong," he said simply. "This isn't contamination. It's evolution. It's communication in its purest form." Dr. Russell was frantically making notes. The spontaneous harmonic convergence between species, this goes beyond anything we theorized. Every species present showed some form of resonance response, even those we thought were completely incompatible with human music. But Thea wasn't listening to him. She was watching Naira, who had turned to face her, with scales shimmering in that particular pattern that she now recognized meant more than any words could express. "I told you," Naira said softly as she approached the piano. "Music isn't about control. It's about connection. About finding the harmonies that exist between all living things, if we're only brave enough to listen for them." Outside the concert hall, news of the performance was already spreading across human and alien networks. The Conservative Coalition was drafting a new position paper. 17 species were requesting cultural exchange programs focused on music. But in that moment, as Thea reached for Naira's hand, none of that mattered. They had created something new in the universe. A bridge between species, a harmony of differences, a love song written in the language of biology itself. 1 year after the historic concert at the United Earth Concert Hall, Thea's old studio in Seattle had become something entirely new. The walls still held their collection of instruments, but now they were joined by devices from a dozen alien worlds: crystalline resonators from Arcturus, quantum harmonizers from the Veil Nebula, and most prominently, a massive neural symphony conductor that took up an entire corner. Thea sat at her familiar piano, watching as her latest class of students, human and alien alike, practiced their harmonics. A young Lissarian was attempting to sync her scale patterns with a human violinist's melody, while an Arcturian crystalline being chimed in perfect counterpoint. "Remember," she called out, "it's not about forcing the harmony. It's about finding the natural resonance between your different forms of expression." Naira entered the studio, her scales shimmering with the iridescent patterns that had become her signature since their discovery. As the first Lissarian to fully integrate human music into her biology, she had become something of a celebrity in both cultures. But here, in their studio, she was simply Thea's partner in all things. "The Intergalactic Cultural Council just approved our proposal," Naira announced, her scales flickering with excitement. "They're establishing harmony centers on every major world in known space. Our curriculum will be the foundation for a whole new field of study: xenoharmonics." Thea smiled, remembering how far they'd come from those first tentative experiments. And the Conservative Coalition, fully on board. After seeing how musical integration has enhanced rather than erased Lissarian culture, they're actually leading the initiative on our homeworld. Naira moved to sit beside Thea at the piano. "Though I don't think any of them have quite mastered your nocturnes yet." The students continued their practice, each combination of species creating new and unexpected harmonies. Through the wall of windows, Seattle's skyline glittered in the evening light, so similar to that first sunset when everything changed. "Did you ever imagine," Thea asked softly, "when you first walked into this studio, that we'd end up here?" Naira's scales rippled with affectionate amusement, creating an entirely new branch of science, revolutionizing interspecies communication, falling in love across the species barrier. Her hand found Thea's. "Not in any of my probability calculations." A chime from the neural symphony conductor interrupted them. Dr. Russell's holographic form materialized, looking excited. "You need to see this," he said without preamble. "We've detected harmonic resonance patterns from the Omega cluster." Thea's breath caught. The Omega cluster was home to species so alien that traditional communication had never been established. "Natural patterns or response to music?" "Both," Russell replied. "They're responding to our broadcast harmonics, but they're also sending back their own patterns. It's like they've been waiting for someone to speak their language." "Or maybe," Naira suggested, her scales showing deep thought patterns, "we're finally learning to hear the music that was always there. The universe itself has rhythms and harmonies. We just needed to learn how to listen for them." The students had gathered around, watching the holographic display of the Omega cluster's patterns with wonder. Thea could see the future in their faces: human, Lissarian, Arcturian, and others yet to come, all learning to speak the universal language of harmony. "I think it's time," Naira said suddenly, her scales showing a pattern Thea had never seen before. "Something new, something hopeful." "Time for what?" to share our personal harmony. Naira's scales flushed slightly. The medical tests confirmed it. Our genetic patterns have achieved a stable resonance. We can have children, Thea. Children who will be born understanding both human music and Lyssarian harmonics. A new generation of natural xenoharmonists. Thea felt tears in her eyes as she pulled Naira close. Around them, their students continued their practice, each combination of species and sound creating new possibilities. Through the neural symphony conductor, the first responses from the omega cluster created patterns of light that danced across the ceiling like aurora. "Listen," Naira whispered, her scales synchronized with Thea's heartbeat. "The universe is singing to us." And it was. In the quantum vibrations between atoms, in the dance of particles through space, in the rhythmic pulse of stars being born and dying. Music was everywhere. They had simply needed to learn how to hear it, how to add their own harmonies to the cosmic symphony. Thea placed her hands on the piano keys, and Naira's scales began to shimmer in anticipation. Around them, their students fell silent, ready to witness another moment of harmony between worlds. As the first notes filled the air, Thea thought about all the barriers that music had broken down, between species, between cultures, between hearts. The sun set over Seattle just as it had that first day, but now its light played across a room full of beings from across the galaxy, all united in the pursuit of harmony. And as Thea played, with Naira beside her and their impossible future ahead of them, she knew that this was just the beginning of the song. In the vastness of space, countless species were learning to add their voices to the melody. And in a small studio in Seattle, where it had all begun, two beings from different worlds had discovered that love, like music, knows no boundaries. It simply finds its own way to resonate, to harmonize, to create something beautiful and new in an endless universe of possibilities.